All right, let's get into this. Let's talk about this draft. We've talked a lot about Texans wide receivers, potential guys at 25, but are we leaving out some guys? Also, you see the guy right there. He might be the kind of guy that D'Amico Ryans likes. And could he be the pick at 25, or could you get him even later? It is the locker room. I am Landry Locker. You can see me here throughout the week at 10:30. You can also see me, hear me on SNL with Cody Stutes, who streamed earlier today. Shout out to Cody Stutes. But I want to get into these wide receivers and some of the names that we're talking about, and perhaps some of the names that maybe we aren't talking about enough. And I want to start with Luther Burden. Luther Burden out of Missouri. Is he being slept on? We've talked about Ibuka. We've talked about McMillan. We've talked about a few other guys, but we don't really talk about Luther Burden, and we don't entertain the possibility. We've talked about Matthew Golden, but is Luther Burden being slept on? And I was listening to guys that I respect when it comes to this scouting stuff talk about Luther Burden, and the knock on Luther Burden was there was decreased production last year at Missouri, although I think that was kind of a team-wide type of thing. And the guy that I was listening to is actually Clarence Hill, formerly of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, now of DLLS, which is a digital channel. He and Jeff Kavanaugh were talking, and Clarence Hill said that he's kind of heard that Luther Burden, there's no character concerns, but he's not necessarily the aggressor at practice. He referenced him being in the back of the line at drills, just kind of ho-humming. And other guys that watched tape, Kavanaugh said that the tape kind of matched kind of the lackluster effort from Luther Burden. I've heard earlier today, I heard Daniel Jeremiah and I heard Bucky Brooks talking on NFL Network. Bucky Brooks, I guess, compared his playmaking to Deebo Samuel. He seems to be one of those guys that maybe he gets drafted in the back end of the first round, but maybe he ends up being one of these second-round guys. But Luther Burden is a name that we really haven't focused a lot on, and I do wonder what the Texans think of Luther Burden. And Dietology says, I don't know why Burden dropped. I don't understand. I think it's as simple as production, and then maybe not over analysis, but analysis of the mannerisms and all that type of stuff. But he didn't do anything at the combine to necessarily hurt himself. But Luther Burden's a guy that we just don't really talk about. Next guy that I am starting to really, really like, and I'm trying to figure out exactly why, but Jayden Higgins out of Iowa State is a guy that I'm starting to like a lot. And I'm wondering, do I like him because I don't like any of the other top guys that we're talking about? Or could there really be something there? And there's a couple of things about Jayden Higgins that there is to like. First of all, he's big. He's 6'4". Second of all, he's fast. He ran the 4.47 at the combine, 39-inch vertical. Was also very, very productive. And he went from Eastern Kentucky to Iowa State, and he did his thing. And there's two Iowa State receivers that we're hearing a lot about. One of them is Higgins, who people think could line up on the outside. Other guys think he can be an inside guy. But he kind of has, I heard Steve Smith kind of describing him and said he kind of has the killer mentality that he doesn't think McMillan has. Now, I will say this, and I did find this interesting, as Steve Smith says that, but he has Higgins, I think 7 or 8 on his list, and he still has McMillan at number 2. So as much as he likes Higgins and as much as I like Higgins, I haven't heard anyone say they like Higgins so much that they would take him instead of McMillan, or they would take him instead of Golden, or they would take him instead of Ibuka. I haven't heard that. So it makes me wonder, are we kind of training our minds to where you don't like certain guys in the first round, so once you go on the second tier and you start breaking these guys down, maybe you fall in love with him a little bit more. I think the Higgins-Knoll thing is interesting because Iowa State was a pretty successful football team this year. They did get to the Big 12 championship game. It was a close game in the first half, and then Arizona State just completely beat the hell out of them in the second half of that game in almost embarrassing fashion. I think the Higgins-Knoll thing is interesting because it kind of reminds me of, and I brought this up today on SNL, kind of reminds me a little bit of Ole Miss back in 2018 when they had DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, and they had Elijah Moore as a freshman, and they only won 5 games. So they weren't a very good team, but you saw those two receivers kind of fall back. I think they both went in the second round, DK and A.J., although DK might have been third, but they were day 2 guys. And that's kind of the Higgins-Knoll thing right now. And I just wonder, do I really, really, really like Higgins? Like, am I sitting here saying take Higgins at 25? The answer to that is no. But am I falling more in love with him because I don't like these other guys and I don't think they're going to be there? And I do wonder where Higgins goes. I think we're talking about a second-round guy in Higgins. I think teams are going to fall in love with Jayden Higgins. And I think a lot of teams are just kind of dismissing the possibility of taking wide receivers in the first round. And then in the second or third round, they're going to be much more open to taking guys. And when you get in that area, when you get past the previously mentioned 3 guys and 4 guys, if you count Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, then there's reason to believe that teams are going to fall in love with these guys, which is why I think there's a possibility that Higgins falls to 58. But I don't know if I would bet on that as far as the Texans. So if you pass on him on 25, much like a lot of these running backs that we've spoken of, then maybe you don't even have the opportunity to get him until the second round. But the Higgins thing, I think, is really, really something to keep an eye on. And I'm becoming a really, really big fan of what he brings and what he could bring in the second round. The other question is this, every conversation that we have about offensive players is going to circle back to this. What does Nick Caley want? Because I would think that Nick Caley has some sort of say in this thing and what they decide to do. I don't think that Nick Caley, first of all, I think he's going to have a strong opinion on who he likes. Second of all, we as media types and you as fans, we don't have any idea what the hell the offense is going to be. And because of that, it's hard to say, well, this guy fits here and this guy fits in this. Like normally whenever you're talking about a wide receiver and there's an established offensive system or there's an established offensive coordinator, you say, okay, well, he would fit this way. Now, sometimes that's kind of a dangerous thing to do because a lot of times what they're asked to do in college it's not what they're going to be asked to do in the NFL. And the reason that they didn't do it in college isn't always because they weren't capable. It's just because of that. That's what they were asked to do. But we have no idea what Nick Caley wants. But I do think this is another thing to kind of consider when it comes to Nick Caley, and we try to kind of connect dots. And basically, we're blind squirrels trying to find a nut when it comes to figuring out what the hell these wide receivers will do. Sweet James says that Higgins is a Xavier Hutchinson. I think that's silly. They're nothing alike. Higgins is way more explosive. He's way more athletic, and he's a way more he's a way more coveted prospect at this point, like in the draft. They weren't talking about Hutchinson. The only thing they have in common is that they both went to Iowa State. I think that's almost like saying that Jackson Dart is Josh Allen. I think it's worse. They went to the same college. That's it. There's nothing similar to what they do at all. Dietology on the super chat says, "You ain't never hate." Swarm. I feel crazy thinking Deadwards is a sleeper. Deadwards is a sleeper. I mean, I guess. I mean, can you be more specific on what exactly you're talking about? Deadwards is a sleeper. But I think that Higgins is really someone that the Texans should look at. Here's the other connection, and it might not matter at all. But let's just pretend that Nick Caley, this is something nobody's talking about here on the Locker Room stream. Appreciate everyone for coming through. Be sure to subscribe, like, right along. Still can't believe Hutchinson got compared to Higgins. I think that's crazy. Donovan Edwards, the running back from Michigan. My bad. Going back to the super chat. Yeah, he's weird, and I think there's a few backs that are really weird with Donovan Edwards, but because if we'd have gone back 2 years after Michigan won the national title, I think we would have assumed that Donovan Edwards is one of these guys that you're talking about as like a second or third round guy. He was unstoppable during that run at times, and now all of a sudden it's like, I think he's a day 3 guy. Some people are saying he might not get drafted. It's kind of like Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State, where if you go back 2 years, they're talking about him being a first round pick. You're talking about he's a freak. You're talking about all these things. It's interesting how those two running backs stuff has kind of changed. But I mean, if you think he's going to be a good player, he's definitely a sleeper. It's out of sight, out of mind. But yeah, I mean, this was a guy that was getting a hell of a lot of attention a couple of years ago. So you're talking about D. Edwards, Michigan. Yeah, him and Ollie are both kind of in that mix when it comes to running backs that we were talking really highly of a couple of years ago, and now we're just kind of lost. But here's the question, and this goes back to what Nick Caley wants. We don't know what type of receiver he likes. We don't know what type of receiver he wants. But any of these guys, like if they reach their potential, like any of these guys we're talking about, whether it's Higgins, whether it's Knoll, whether it's Burden, like these are ideal guys. But the process of trying to figure it out is these guys watch the tape, they figure out how they work in their system, and then often they kind of talk to the coach. And that's what I want to bring up with the Nick Caley thing that I think is kind of interesting, because Higgins went to Iowa State and he played for Matt Campbell. And Matt Campbell is one of those guys who's kind of been linked to NFL jobs, but the one thing that Matt Campbell has in common with Nick Caley is they're both Ohio guys. Much like Nick Caserio, much like Josh McDaniels, much like a lot of guys, they're both Ohio guys. And Nick Caley at his press conference, his introductory press conference, he talked about how he grew up and he always wanted to be a coach. He said from the second that he could walk and talk, he wanted to be a coach. And this was kind of the most passionate that Nick Caley got when he was talking about high school football in Ohio, talking about wanting to be a coach, talking about idolizing. He mentioned Josh McDaniels' dad. And if you ever see Ohio guys, when they get around each other, they find a connection, and then all of a sudden, like, they immediately become best friends, especially if they're talking ball. It's weird. It's not weird. It's kind of cool, but it happens. And there's always that connection. Matt Campbell is 3 years older than Nick Caley, and Matt Campbell is from Massillon, Ohio, and Nick Caley is from Canton, Ohio, which is 7 miles apart. So when these guys talk, they already have kind of some common ground. Who knows how many conversations like generate from this, and it's 7 miles apart. The other interesting thing about this is that Matt Campbell's dad was actually a high school football coach in Ohio, and their schools are 7 miles apart. Now, we might say, well, that doesn't mean much. You could be right. But let's say that Matt Campbell really, really likes Higgins, and he thinks Higgins is going to be an excellent player. And when I went and listened to some of the stuff he said, he kind of glows when he talks about Higgins transferring from Eastern Kentucky to Iowa State, being extremely productive. I do wonder if there's kind of like a little bit of bond, and I think naturally there will be, between Matt Campbell and Nick Caley. And if you look at just the situation with the receivers and where the Texans are and where they're picking at 25, where they might not get any of these big names, I do wonder if Matt Campbell and Nick Caley, like the conversation they have about Higgins, maybe holds a little bit more weight than perhaps it would. I'm not sitting here saying that if Matt Campbell doesn't think Higgins is ready, that there's going to be some sort of favor done. But I do think the dialogue and the information, even if it's bad information, I think the information that Matt Campbell would give Nick Caley about Higgins, just because of the bond they have growing up within 7 miles of each other, both playing high school football in Ohio, and Campbell's dad being one of those high school coaches that Nick Caley idolized. I do think that the information that they're going to get on Higgins is probably going to be pretty strong if those two talk and when they talk, and why would they not? So I would kind of keep an eye on that. The other thing that I think that Higgins has going for him is the Texans kind of need a wide receiver with size. He has size. They need a guy who's good in the red zone. He's very good in the red zone. And they're also not opposed to using multiple slots. We've already talked about the connection that Nick Caley has in New England when they were using multiple slots when he first got there, before they kind of had the tight end phase with Hernandez and Gronk, and then they went right back to the slots. They went from Welker and Edelman to, sandwiched between his time in New England, to Edelman and Amendola. And then he went to the Rams, and they had multiple guys in the slots where they had Cooper Kupp and Puka, and then they added Jordan Whittington to the mix. So they were always willing to bring in guys that were slots. So some people think that Higgins is a guy that perhaps can play outside a little bit, but he's kind of a guy in the slot. Naturally, when we talk about receivers, a lot of people say, well, you already got a slot, so you can't do that. We've kind of already established, at least in this community and on this channel, in the SNL family, that they don't give a rat's ass. We don't know a lot about Nick Caley's offense, but I think it's safe to assume, and it's safe to say, that they don't really give a rat's ass about having multiple guys that can do work in the slot. Matter of fact, it might be something that they kind of welcome. So just a little something to keep an eye on. The Ohio connection with Matt Campbell and Nick Caley, 7 miles within each other. Jayden Higgins being one of those guys that's kind of intriguing. And 25 kind of being a little bit no man's land when it comes to where the Texans are selecting and the receivers that they may pick. It wouldn't be the craziest thing to assume that maybe someone on the back end of the first round goes with a Burden or a Higgins. Like, do we see 5 wide receivers in the first round? And we've been saying 3, but I guess if we want to count Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, and I think if he goes to Cleveland, I would assume that they're looking at him as a wide receiver. I saw Jeremiah has him as his number 2 prospect and has him as the top wide receiver in the draft, which I would agree with. I think he is the best wide receiver in the draft. But maybe we see 5 wide receivers taken. The other thing that you do kind of look at when it comes to the Texans and needing a wide receiver is there's a lot of teams that need wide receivers in front of you at 25. And we've already talked about the bad situation of drafting behind the Minnesota Vikings, who really, really need draft picks and don't necessarily need wide receivers, and how bad of a range that is when it comes to the wide receivers, and where the Texans would be. So if you're looking at kind of the situation that maybe the Texans, if they do like one of these guys, will have to get up. And it's kind of similar in the second round. The second round might be even more of a danger zone. But both of these teams, Green Bay at 23 and the Chargers at 22, could easily take a receiver. Tampa Bay actually visited with Golden today. Seattle has a couple of guys. They got Kupp and JSN. And then you look at Arizona and Cincinnati, they could take wide receivers as well. So the money spot, if you want to get the wide receiver of your choice, is right here at 15. But here's where the news gets even worse, is in the second round. So let's pretend that the first round, where there's mediocre receivers, let's pretend that these teams kind of pass on wide receivers, and they're more into what we're talking about, this second round opportunity. look what you have in front of you here if you're trying to get a wide receiver. And this is why Higgins is going to it's kind of going to be tough, and maybe you have to trade up significantly. So Dallas is in the mix for a wide receiver. We don't know whether they're going to take one. And then you have all these teams, Miami, Tyreek Hill trade, Bengals, never know, Seattle. Been talking about them for a wide receiver. Seattle actually has 2 picks there from the DK Metcalf trade. Tampa Bay's visiting with receivers. Their guys aren't getting any younger. And then you have Green Bay, the Chargers. You have the Bills, who were trying to improve their receiving core last year. And then you have Carolina, who's trying to get more weapons for Bryce Young. So when you're talking about guys like Higgins and you say, could you get him at 58? I think the answer is maybe, but you're kind of in a danger zone. And I think that naturally, much like the question I posed at the start of this thing, I think naturally teams might be more attracted to these day 2 targets, these day 2 wide receivers, because of how weak the top of the draft appears to be. So you're in a really, really tough spot right now if you're the Texans. Like if you're the teams drafted near the top of the second round, like the same teams that are drafting at the top of the first, they probably don't even entertain the possibility of taking wide receivers. Like Mike Vrabel, they signed Stephon Diggs. They're not taking a wide receiver at number 4. We don't think. So maybe they're more open to it in the second round. And maybe they want to bring Higgins in and try to improve this wide receiver core. Maybe Higgins or Burden are guys that they're looking at. So that's the problem with where the Texans are right now. It's good to be a good squad, obviously. But when the draft comes around and you're sitting there at 25 and you have a bunch of bad teams in front of you, and then you have teams that are kind of in the same tier that are looking for the same thing. And in the first round, you have Minnesota, who's just trying to trade back. Like the draft positioning right now for the Texans is not ideal. And you also have these teams that have been known to pounce, and the really, really good teams, the Philadelphias. They're always willing to move up in the draft. They're always willing to move around any direction in the draft. Buffalo, they've been willing to move back last year. Kansas City traded up for Xavier Worthy last year. So you're kind of in a weird territory when it comes to Higgins. But in the spirit of that, we're going to do a mock draft tonight, and we'll do that in about 18 minutes. We're going to do a mock draft, and the goal is going to be, because we always have a theme of each mock draft, and I always got to make this clear because sometimes I have a goal, and then someone's like, oh, that mock draft sucks. Yeah, we have a goal. It's a theme. The theme of this one is we got to get Burden or Higgins in this mock draft. We got to get them at the ideal time. So we're going to use the PFN mock draft, and we're going to try to get Burden, and we're going to try to get Higgins. We have to get one or the other. We will call this appropriately the Higgins or Burden mock draft. And we'll see where that goes, and we'll see how that goes. I would hope for Higgins, but Burden is someone to keep an eye on. I definitely could see either one of these guys going on the back end of the first round, and maybe surprising some people. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I'm a Higgins guy. That's going to be the main target. Is it going to be possible? It's tough. You're in a tough spot at 25. Really, really tough spot at 25. Big time. Tay Rose says he's hoping for Kelvin Banks. That's Stutz' guy as well. I almost wonder if you like Banks, if you trade up to 15 with Atlanta, who also needs picks, and figure that out. Of all the draft chatter, I just don't know that I'm buying the Banks slip as much as it's being discussed. It seems really weird with the position he plays, with how productive he was. The highlights that they show, they don't show that he was roughed up. Like the Georgia tape is going to be like, you're going to see Jalen Walker drafted, and 60% of his highlights are going to be against Texas, against Banks. They're not going to show Banks limping around. They're also not going to acknowledge that Quinn Ewers kind of walked into some of those sacks. But the Banks thing, if he's there at 25, hey, Keep your fingers crossed. I don't blame you. Now, wait till 25 and don't start popping champagne because, as we said, Minnesota at 24, offensive line is one of the big obvious. It's one of the obvious needs for the Texans. Everybody knows it. If someone likes Banks, that's the place to trade up. So you got to keep a really close eye on that as well. But the Higgins thing is something to keep an eye on. Cody says he's too much like Nico. How? What do you mean? Like how? I don't know how he's too much like Nico. Some people think he's more of a slot guy. I don't even think they necessarily play alike. But why would that be a bad thing? This is my favorite draft thing. This is like the funniest thing to me. Like, could you imagine if Sean McVay, and this is when Nick Caley was, and I'm not picking on you, Cody. All love, all respect for everyone in the chat. But when someone says something like this, I just kind of want to give it a little bit of attention. If you want to follow up on it, you can. But could you imagine if, like, when Sean McVay and Nick Caley were in the draft room, if Sean McVay said, man, you know what? I really like this Puka guy. Like, they really didn't use him too much at BYU. And I'm rubbing my magic crystal ball. I envision him breaking the reception record as a rookie. And I really think he's capable of doing that. But you know what? He's too much like Cooper Kupp. Like, we can't have two Cooper Kupps, man. Like, that would suck. We can't do that. He's too much like Cooper Kupp. So we can't take this Puka guy. We can't do that. Or if the Texans, and this has been kind of the thing that we've talked about, and Dylan, I think you're kind of on the right track. But the Texans are sitting there talking about drafting Omarion Hampton, and they're like, you know what? We like him. Man, he can do everything. He's got potential probably even as a receiver. But you know what? He's too much like Joe Mixon. Like, we don't need two Joe Mixons. We need to get like a scat back who can like catch and passes, but not necessarily. We don't want two Joe Mixons. If they can get two Nico Collins, first of all, I don't think that they play exactly alike. I think his route running is probably a little bit more crisp. I don't think Nico's a bad route runner, but I think Higgins' route running is a little bit more crisp. I also don't think he's as violent as Nico Collins. He's really good at catching the ball contested and stuff. He's fast. He can get up. But let's just say that he is exactly Nico Collins. If the Texans can't make two Nico Collins or two Joe Mixons work, much like the Rams, they made Puka and Cooper Kupp work. Now, Cooper started getting hurt, but when they were on the field at the same time, they were top 3 in most of the advanced stats that you look at when it comes to offense. If that's the reason that you pass on somebody, then someone's ass needs to get fired. Like that, someone's ass needs to get fired if you're going to pass on someone because they're too much like Nico Collins at this point. I mean, you have the least amount of depth from at the wide receiver position of any of most squads in the league. You don't have a really deep running back room. Your tight ends, there's not much explosiveness there. They can't be too picky. So if your knock on Higgins is that he's too much like Nico Collins, then I think you're answering your own question. Because I know it took a while for me to kind of buy in on Nico Collins being a WR1, but if you can get another one of those mofos, yeah, I'll take him for sure. Appreciate you for partaking in the chat though. Mob Squad 1914 says, I like Higgins. I also like Nolan Royal. Yeah, Noel is a little bit smaller, but I mean, like I said, I compare this kind of to probably a poor man's version of AJ Brown and DK Metcalf in 2018, when at Ole Miss in 2018. I guess the 2019 draft, where all of a sudden you see these two guys and you're like, how the hell were they on the same team and they didn't do anything? And next thing you know, they're productive guys that probably warranted being drafted in the first round. But yeah, sign me up for two Nicos. I mean, if he's Nico, take him at 25. Don't even ask any questions. If that's what he is, don't even ask any questions. I don't think he's quite that. And I do think it's interesting. I think it's really telling, like, Steve Smith loves him, but he still has him 6 slots behind McMillan. So maybe we're falling too in love with second-tier guys. Perhaps guilty as charged. But if he's Nico Collins, I'll take him. I think a lot of people agree on that. Having two Nicos, Bless as Bradley, Trey of Texas, same thing. And be sure to like the video. Herman looking out. 133 in the chat, 12 likes. Go ahead and like the video. Like Herman just said. But it does all go down to, what does Kaylee want to reset? The Ohio connection with Matt Campbell. Grew up 7 miles within each other. High school football coach, Campbell's dad. Nick Kaylee always looked up to high school football coaches. So he's going to get some really good information. I'm sure there's going to be a good conversation, assuming that Nick Kaylee talks to Matt Campbell. This is the question that I asked earlier today. At what point do you put the popcorn down? And at what point does the draft get real? Because with where the Texans are picking at 25, there's not really a lot of impactful stuff happening at the top. Now, there's teams in your division drafting, but for the most part, like, you don't expect a lot of these guys to get picked. And I think it goes right back to the money spot we were talking about trading to. I think you can eat your popcorn when you watch Cam Ward come off the board, when you watch Travis Hunter, whoever. You see what happens with Jacksonville. You see what happens there. Indianapolis. 15 is when it gets real. This is when you put the popcorn down and stuff starts getting real for the Texans. I think you kind of draw this in half for where you really, really need to pay attention. Because I could probably give each person a sheet of paper and have you write down the 14 guys that are going to be off the board. And I think you would have a pretty good idea of who those 14 guys are. I think we could be looking at 2 tight ends, maybe 1 wide receiver. The 2 quarterbacks is something to keep an eye on. New Orleans is getting theirs. I think the top tackles, Genty's going to be off the board. After that, all bets are off. We don't know what any of these teams are going to do. And a lot of these teams need the same thing that the Texans need. Same things. And you also have the Minnesota factor. So when viewing this draft, it's not the chaotic, immediate feeling that you had 2 years ago. And last year you were off on day one, so it was popcorn all the way through. This one's kind of a meeting in the middle of the Caserio and D'Amico era, where the first one, my God, that was just quick. Boom, you draft CJ Stroud. Boom, you trade up for Will Anderson. Boom, bye-bye. That was it. That was quick. And really, that dialogue and that excitement just carried you throughout the night. Last year, you traded your first rounder. You traded the other first rounder to get Will Anderson, and you were just kind of chilling. So you probably, if you're eating popcorn, and I actually eat movie popcorn even when I don't go to the movies. I go in the theater and I get the popcorn and I'll take it wherever I'm going. That's how addicted I am to movie popcorn. But the best thing about movie popcorn when you go into the theater is when you get the refill. And you just basically make yourself sick. Let's just be honest. Or you get some on the way out to take home. But it's bottomless, which is what last year was. Last year, you needed a bottomless popcorn. Because you on day one, you weren't participating. You were just kind of chilling. You were just kind of observing. This year, you probably need maybe a large. And then after that, you got to rub the hands together and get your game face on. So as far as the viewing calendar, whatever you want to call it, I would say right at 15. That's where you really, really, really got to pay attention, and when the draft gets real. Other than that, you're just kind of observing. You're kind of in the nosebleeds. Oh, Jacksonville got who? Oh, the Colts. There's still some WTF moments, but once 15 hits, that's when it gets real. Johnny says Atlanta's the real question. I don't think those guys have a clue what they're doing anymore. Well, Arthur Blank said they're going defense. So Arthur Blank said they're going defense. Quite frankly, Atlanta made a mistake. Like, let's just be serious. Atlanta made a mistake. And I know there was a lot of like celebration, and Raheem Morris seems like a good guy, but anyone who watched all those Atlanta games last year, the guy doesn't know what he's doing clock management wise, and he might not be in this for long. Raheem Morris. I mean, they kept Kirk Cousins in the lineup longer than they should have. They kind of lingered around that, and he had some of the worst clock management blunders that I think I've ever seen in my entire life. But they should have just hired Bill Belichick and said F it. No one would have criticized them for hiring the best coach of all time. And as a result, we now got Bill Belichick at North Carolina with like a 20-year-old girlfriend, and we're not even seeing him in the NFL. And they got Raheem Morris, who I think might be one of those guys who's two and done. But Arthur Blank says they're going defense. We know that they need draft picks. That's for sure. We know they need draft picks. That's for sure. The other thing that nobody talks about with Atlanta, who were they competing with for that Kirk Cousins contract? I'm not sitting here saying that you don't give Kirk Cousins an opportunity to be a starting quarterback, whatever, and it started out okay, but who were they competing with that contract? Didn't quite get that at all. But Atlanta is at 15. They need picks. There could potentially be a trade up. I think that's a money trade up issue or possibility, but they're not taking offense. Arthur Blank said it. Not sure how thrilled Raheem Morris was. I know if Belichick had been there, he would have been pissed off for them mentioning that. I don't think Caserio would like Cal McNair. I don't think D'Amico would like Cal McNair to do that. But Arthur Blank said they're going defense. So as far as what they're doing, that's what they've said. Backstreet Marine says trade up for Golden. You probably have to get up to around 12 or 13 to do that. I think that's a little bit too rich. Not as high on Golden as a lot of people are. Another possibility that we haven't really been talking about, and to reset, the Ohio connection with Kaylee and Matt Campbell. I think that's something to keep an eye on when it comes to Higgins. The draft gets real at 15. And I wonder about Tyler Booker out of Alabama. This is a guy that I have zero doubt that D'Amico Ryans is going to love. And this is just a little snippet from the combine of him talking about why he loves football. And I think this is probably the type of mindset that D'Amico Ryans, Nick Caley, Nick Caserio would like to have on the offensive line. I do wonder if he falls into the second round, but I think when it comes to the intangibles, when it comes to the talking, the swarm, I don't think he gets more swarm than this.
Like adversity is going to hit. How are you going to respond? And then everybody loves to play football but when it's easy, but who loves to play football when it's hard? And I feel like that's what separates the good guys from the great guys at the game of football. And then ultimately, I just love the aggressiveness and the tenacity of the game of football, like how is legal assault out there. And I love football because the brand of football that I play, I make guys not love football anymore. And I do that every down by really just giving them my all and letting them know I'm not going to let up. So the thing I love the most about football is taking the love away from other people.
Taking the love of football away from guys. That's a D'Amico guy. It's a D'Amico guy. Do they take a guard at 25 though? Don't know. But I've wanted to make this clear, and as we kind of dig into the draft and we start to really start to speculate and wonder, the intangibles part that they like, you can check that. That's going to be checked. The identity that they say they want their offensive line to have, you can check that. The big school prospect that they seem to like, you can check that. System fit, we have no idea what that is. But Tyler Booker is a very, very good player. Does he fit? In some ways, the answer is hell yes. In other ways, your guess is as good as mine when it comes to what the hell he's going to be. So let's keep an eye on Tyler Booker. And let's do so with the acknowledgement that Tyler Booker is definitely going to be someone that D'Amico Ryans likes. Does he fit? Don't know. But he's definitely going to be someone that D'Amico likes. All right, so let's do the Higgins or Burden mock draft. We're going to do the Pro Football Network mock. And the goal is simple. The 2 wide receivers that we've mentioned, new names really that we've gone in depth on, Luther Burden, Jayden Higgins, you have to get one of these guys. And the Higgins noise is simple. He's getting a lot of hype, but he's not getting enough hype to propel him over the top 3 guys that we've been talking about. Steve Smith loves him. What's he doing at 8 on that list then? 7 or 8, wherever the hell that is. Maybe it's changed. But what's he doing on that list? Luther Burden. A lot of noise last year. I think we anticipated him being a for sure first-round pick last year. Well, kind of died down a little bit. We got to get one of these guys. And let's see what the opportunity is to do that. Let's go to the 7 rounds. We will do a normal speed. We'll do the Texans. And we will enter the solo draft accordingly. And that's always the first test. Do they take Cam Ward first? The answer is yes. Cam Ward is there. So this is officially a legitimate draft that we're playing in. Coming up in 20 minutes, I want to do a GOAT exercise. The Texans have a strength right there. Golden goes 15 to the Falcons. A little bit of a surprise, maybe a middle finger at Arthur Blank. And right off the top, Colston Loveland goes directly ahead of the Texans. We have a couple of trade offers. The Jets want us to trade back 17 spots. They give us 73 and 110. The Bears, they'll give us 39 and 41. They just want 89 in there. We'll accept their trade because we're trying to get Burden and we're trying to get Higgins. We're trying to get one of those guys. That is our goal. We're going to trade back 14 spots and cross our fingers. Kind of a dangerous place to be, but we'll do that. We'll accept and we'll cross our fingers. So far, so good. There goes Watts. There's Burden. So we need Higgins to fall to us. And right off the top, this might kind of show just how difficult this is. We're going to have to reject this from Tampa Bay. We're going to go to wide receivers. And they actually have Higgins ranked 65. We're not going to do that. We're going to take him at 39 because we like him so much and we need to reach our goal. So we're going to draft Higgins right there at 39. We had the trade back. Kansas City still wants to trade. We're going to reject. We're going to stay put. But we've reached our goal. Now we are at 41. And at 41, I've got to think this is when you stockpile the picks. I got to think at 41, not ideal. And we'll go up and look. We got Cam Ward. Browns go tackle. That would be very Browns. And we have another tackle. And we got Hunter with the Raiders. Whatever. But we're at 41. Best players available are D tackles. D'Amico Ryans is still the coach. So he takes Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. D'Amico got that extra pick. We know how he feels about defense. We know how he feels about D-line. So he had to go to Ole Michigan. Get him a D lineman. Quinshawn Judkins off the board. Would have been a nice look here. Travion Henderson, too. That one hurts me. So the running back dream kind of dies right there. This is kind of the danger zone of the original second-round pick that we've spoken of. The Grant thing was just too hard for D'Amico to pass up. They even passed on Donovan Jackson, offensive guard. I know the offensive line folks are bad. And then you know how I would be. I would be sitting there thinking, okay, there's running backs. We're getting to 50, the running backs. And then all of a sudden that running back run just happens right in front of you. Sean Payton gets his running back. Denver's been clear they want one. They take Caleb Johnson. Judkins goes to Seattle. And then right there, 2 spots ahead. And I think Travion Henderson would be the one that people took. Travion Henderson just right in front of the Texans. Bada bing, bada boom. So now we're at 58. And we look at this running back group. Not great. You got a little Scatabo action. You got a little Ollie Gordon. As much as I like running backs, I'm going to pass on that. And we're actually going to go offensive line. We got our receiver. We're going to go offensive line. We're going to take Fairchild out of Georgia. No, we are not. We're not going to take a center. Tackle. We'll go with one of, I think Stutz likes the guy. We'll go with Ursery out of Minnesota. So there you go. Tackle, young tackle, and we'll see how that goes. You know, this hurts me. Not big on the O-line, but that's where we're at. So far, we have Higgins, we have Grant, and we have the offensive line. So the 3 biggest needs, arguably, that this squad needs, you're pretty good. We have an offer from Indianapolis. Indianapolis wants to trade up 1 spot, and they'll give us a 5th next year. Now, what do the Colts want, and why would we want to help Indianapolis? Who knows, but let's just go ahead and do it just out of curiosity to see what the hell this simulation looks like. So they wanted Emory Jones out of LSU. Howie Roseman is called. No, thank you. Now we're at the tackle. Cameron Williams is a polarizing prospect. There's a lot of guys who like the potential, the potential development. There's also a lot of guys who kind of just think he sucks. And he's a little bit too raw. Probably one of the lowest floor, high ceiling combos of all these Texas offensive linemen that we'll be talking about over the course of the 3 days. But I don't think the Texans are going to do that. So we're right here at 80. We're going to get our running back. We're going to take Scatabo. Scatabo falls, which I know he's very popular. So Scatabo is your running back. You didn't partake in the run. You kind of set back, and then Scatabo falls to you. So you take Scatabo. So right now we've reached our goal of getting Higgins. We got Kenneth Grant with the extra compensation that we acquired by trading back. We got the offensive tackle, and we got the running back. So not the worst draft so far for the Texans. When you look at the Higgins thing, if we want Higgins, it'll have to be at 25. SG3 says, I do think there's kind of a no man's land factor, and we kind of discussed it a little bit earlier. That could be right. Bryant wanted Donovan Jackson. I just think if the D lineman is there and you have an extra pick, I feel like the defensive minded coach who basically has everything else on the defense feeling pretty good, I feel like it would be hard for him to pass on getting another D lineman in there with how he talks about it. I think it might be hard no matter what, but I think if you put him in that situation, you have the guy from the big school there, I think it would be hard for D'Amico to pass. So I get what you're saying there. But this mock is going not as bad as it could have. Jake Majors out of Texas, the center, that sucks. I feel like they're going to like him. Don't know how early they would like him, but that's someone to keep an eye on. Now we're here at 166, and we have 3 picks remaining. 166. They like Brashard Smith a lot. The receiving threat out of SMU out of the backfield. I think he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. I think in this area, you also have at 195, Jayden Blue. I think these are 2 backs that they're going to like. You have the wide receiver. Those are two receiving backs. We're going to take Brashard Smith out of SMU. He's got experience at receiver. He's also someone that you can use out of the backfield. So you basically take kind of a hybrid guy, throw him into the mix. We've seen Nick Caley. We saw New England like to use multiple running backs. D'Amico, he says he wants to. So now your backfield is mix in Scatabo, and you have Smith kind of out there, and then you have Agumbawale and Pierce. And you got to think this is the end probably for Pierce. Maybe both. Maybe Agumbawale as well. But you have guys that at least have some sort of hope. And there goes Jayden Blue to the Jags. So Jayden Blue will be in the division. So that you draft Smith, the guy that you pass on, he ends up in the division. Not a nightmare, but for as someone that's kind of the head of the blue fan club, it at least catches my attention for sure. I think Grant was a good pick too. I mean, even I can say that, especially when you get the second draft selection. Brashard Smith, they like. I think they do. You really choosing DT over OL? No, I'm choosing Grant over the offensive lineman. That's not how draft works. Are you choosing DT over OL? You don't turn in the slip and say, "Hey, I want a DT instead of an OL." Yes, I'm choosing Grant over the other offensive lineman. I don't think we get to that point. The tight end now, we got to get our tight end, and it happens to be two guys that they like. The tight end situation falls right into your lap. These are two guys that they like. They like Hawes out of Georgia Tech. Said a lot of things. And Fedone out of Nebraska. Now, Fedone, I think, is a little bit underrated. I think he's underrated as a receiver. He's kind of one of those weight room guys. Hawes is a guy is just going to be a complete ass kicker at tight end. We're not going ass kicker. We're going upside. We're going with Fedone. So we get Fedone right there. One of mine and Stutes' favorite guys. John Harris loves this guy too, by the way. So we get Fedone right there at 236. Quick turnaround at 241. And this is about to be a wrap. So here, what are we going to do? Are we going to swing for the fences? I would imagine they go O-line. They might like corner because they need some cornerback depth. Just kind of a tough situation when it comes to the corners. There's nothing awesome there. Linebacker, does D'Amico want his linebacker? Edge, he probably is pretty tempted to take an edge. And then D lineman, D'Amico really, really likes the D lineman. We're going to go offense. We're going to ignore D'Amico. We're going to give this pick to Nick Caley. Halls is still there. Do we want to get two tight ends? Do we just want to completely revive the tight end room and take both Halls and Fedone? Might be a little much. I'm intrigued by it. Might be a little much. Brew McCoy's like 30 years old. I don't think he gets drafted. He did meet with the Texans. He is open to special teams. But I don't think that we're going to take Jimmy Horn Jr. out of Colorado. He's kind of a gadget guy. He's a special teamer. We're going to take Jimmy Horn Jr. as our final guy. So we end up with two wide receivers. We got Higgins. We got a D tackle. We got an offensive tackle. We got two running backs. One of them is a hybrid. And we get the tight end. And that's the end of the draft. I actually do not hate this mock draft at all. Not bad at all. That's what we end up with right there. We got Higgins, Grant, Ursery, Scatabo, Brashard Smith, Fedone, and then a little Jimmy Horn, and we got an extra 5th round pick next year. So there we go. I actually think this ended up okay. I like this draft. I really do. It satisfies everyone. Nick Caley gets his tight end. He gets his wide receiver. Got a couple of running backs. You only take one guy on defense. Happens to be a guy that perhaps could have been a 1st round pick. Comes from the big school like they like. I'm down with this. I'm down with this draft. The Horn pick was just kind of a wild card type of thing. I don't know if he's even drafted or not. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Benji Man says, please do another one and make it normal. I think that's pretty normal. I think it's a good draft. I think that's a really good draft. You get the wide receiver a little bit later on. You trade back. That's a very normal, solid draft. I actually think it worked out great. Kind of want to screenshot that. Take a picture of that one. Show that to Stutes. I don't think Stutes is put together as good of a mock as that. Look at that. Click. Like it. Like it a lot. Take Higgins a little bit normal. I'm good with that. Willie says that's the best draft he's seen so far. Sometimes it just happens like that. You go into it, it ends up happening that way. Higgins, Grant, and Scatabo. I like the rest. I like, but the rest is meh. Could be. I'm not an expert on the tackle. I think they like Smith. I like Fedoni a lot. So who knows? Some people like Halls better. I do wonder what they would do, who they would pick between Halls and Fedoni. I think they would like both of them, but I do like what those guys bring. Andrew says, do you stop watching the draft after the trade out of the first one? I never stop watching the draft. I've been watching every minute of the draft for a long time. Chris says, Landry, would you be a fan of a trade back and having a party on day 2? It's starting to grow on me. Yeah, I'm always a fan of the trade back, especially in this draft. The trade back would be great. Second day is the best. I agree with Johnny, 100%. Before we get out of here, we'll reset everything we spoke of, but I kind of looked at some the 2 quarterbacks that we talked about the most. If you were a millennial growing up, were Brady and Manning, and there was always like a debate about those guys. So I just decided to kind of dive into those guys and what their defense was ranked when they started winning rings. And I'm gonna share. I'm actually sharing the prep document, which can always be a little bit dangerous, but who the hell cares? So you look at this, and the first number is what the defense was ranked versus what the offense was ranked. The Brady section is when they won Super Bowls. And I'm bringing this up because I kind of wanted to revisit what I said about CJ Stroud and how an elite defense can be a better asset than an elite offensive line or an average offense. And I looked at Brady's Super Bowls. Like 2001, it was pretty balanced. So it was 6-6. And by balanced, it was 100% balanced. 2003, the defense was first, the offense was 12th. 2004, the defense was second and fourth. Then you had 8th and 4th, so the offense was better. 2016, just completely balanced. And then you can kind of see, like, at the start of his career, the defense was top 2 in 2 out of 3 Super Bowls. And then the offense started to kind of take over as he got more comfortable and they started doing their thing. Quite frankly, their best teams and their most explosive offenses really didn't even win Super Bowls. But then you look at Manning, and I think the Manning thing is interesting. From when he won the Super Bowl, Manning, early on in his career, it was very unbalanced when he was going one and done. So you had 15th ranked defense and 4th. They were one and done. 7th and 17th, one and done. 20th and 2nd, still one and done. God, Peyton lost a lot of one and dones when you revisit this. 19th and 1st, one and done. 20th and 2nd and 2nd. Lost to the Steelers. Then you had 23rd and 2nd, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. And then you go down here, and when he was on the Broncos, the defense was elite. So I just did that, just a small exercise to kind of see. There's not really a ton of connections to it, but I do think it's interesting that early on in Brady's career, the defense was kind of the strength of the squad. And with Manning, when he had these explosive offenses and average defenses, it wasn't until they kind of revived that he ended up getting the job done. So I think when we talk about like CJ's weapons and his surroundings, they sucked last year, but I do think that an elite defense, there's serious value to having an extremely elite defense with CJ Stroud and the Texans, to where I would almost rather have an elite defense than an elite offensive line. And a play caller, obviously, that knows what the hell he's doing is in Nick Caley. So we'll see how that whole thing goes. So just to kind of reset what all we said, Higgins or Burden mock draft. I'm a Higgins guy now. Burden, kind of an interesting prospect, but give me Higgins day 2. Put the popcorn away at 14. That's when Ish gets real. And maybe we're falling in love. And by we, I mean me. Maybe I'm falling in love with these draft prospects and these day 2 guys because the day 1s just aren't that good. Who knows? Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like. Be sure to ride along. Be sure to tell me why the mock draft sucked, if you believe it. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Be on the lookout for the news about the draft party, the day 2 draft party, and be on the lookout for SNL, 4 o'clock, locker room, 10:30. We got you covered. We're all in this together. Appreciate y'all for coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Locker Room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey. Locker Room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source. We the pulse of the city too. Landlocked. Got the game in the headlock. Localize every time. Can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not 2. Plug